The cotton fields of East Texas stretched endlessly under the brutal summer sun of 1843, their white bowls heavy with the promise of wealth, for some. For others, those same fields meant only suffering, separation, and a kind of death that happened while the heart still beat. This is the story of Samuel, an enslaved man who watched his world shatter when his master sold the woman he loved, and of the ancient power he called upon to balance the scales of justice in a land where law and morality had long ago abandoned the enslaved. Samuel had known slavery his entire life, born into bondage on a plantation in Louisiana before being sold eastward into Texas at age 15. Now at 32, he had learned to navigate the impossible mathematics of survival, how much resistance invited the lash, how much submission preserved dignity, where the line existed between staying alive and truly living. He carried his mother's memory like a talisman, her whispered stories of Guinea and the spirits who watched over their people even in this foreign land of pine forests and endless cotton. She had died when he was 12, worked to death in the cane fields, but her voice remained, teaching him that the old ways had not died. That power existed beyond the master's whip and the overseer's gun. If you're watching this story unfold and feeling the weight of Samuel's world, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We bring you these untold stories of resistance, survival, and the human spirit's refusal to be broken. And comment below. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. Your engagement helps these forgotten voices reach more people. The plantation where Samuel now lived belonged to Nathaniel Hartwell, a man whose cruelty was legendary even among other slaveholders in Harrison County. Hartwell had purchased the land 5 years earlier with money inherited from his father's shipping empire. Determined to prove himself as a cotton baron in this newly settled territory, he approached slavery with the cold efficiency of a businessman, viewing human beings as mere units of production, their value measured solely in pounds of picked cotton and the price they might fetch at auction. He kept meticulous records in leather-bound ledgers, noting each enslaved person's output, any signs of insubordination, and their estimated market value. To Hartwell, Samuel was simply male Negro, strong build, age 32, value $1,200, satisfactory worker, but shows occasional defiance in eyes. Samuel had met Rose 3 years after arriving at the Hartwell plantation. She had been there since childhood, orphaned at 6 when her parents were sold away to separate buyers in Mississippi. Rose possessed a quiet strength that drew Samuel to her immediately. She moved through the plantation's horrors with her head unbowed, her spirit intact despite everything that sought to crush it. They had married in the traditional way of enslaved people, jumping the broom one Sunday evening, while the other enslaved workers gathered to witness and celebrate this small assertion of humanity in their dehumanized world. Master Hartwell had given his permission, seeing potential profit in any children they might produce, adding a crude note in his ledger, breeding pair, both healthy stock. For 2 years, Samuel and Rose built something resembling a life within the narrow confines allowed them. They shared a small cabin at the edge of the quarters, its walls chinked with mud and moss, its floor packed earth. Rose grew herbs in a small plot behind their dwelling, okra and greens for eating, but also plants her grandmother had taught her about, roots and leaves that held older knowledge. Samuel carved small wooden figures during the few hours of rest allowed on Sabbath days, his hands creating beauty as an act of resistance against a system designed to reduce him to a mere tool. They spoke in whispers after dark about impossible dreams, freedom, a future where their children might know something other than bondage, a world where their love could exist without the constant threat of separation. That threat became reality on a humid morning in August, when Master Hartwell's fortunes shifted. A bad cotton crop the previous year, combined with gambling debts in Jefferson, had created a cash crisis. Hartwell needed money quickly, and in the economics of slavery, human beings were the most liquid assets. He began calculating which of his property could fetch the highest immediate return. Rose, healthy and still young at 26, with years of productive labor ahead and the capacity to bear children, represented significant value on the auction block. Samuel's worth was tied to his strength and field experience, but Hartwell decided he could not afford to sell both. The plantation still needed workers. The choice was purely financial. Samuel first learned of the impending sale not from his master, but from whispers in the quarters. Old Jacob, who worked in the main house and overheard conversations not meant for enslaved ears, brought the news one evening. "Master's planning to sell Rose to a trader coming through next week," Jacob said quietly. his weathered face grave. Heard him telling Mrs. at supper, "Man's from Alabama gathering a coffle to march south." The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. His vision blurred, his breath caught in his chest. Around him, the familiar world of the quarters, the cooking fires, the children playing despite their exhaustion, the low hum of evening conversation, seemed suddenly distant and unreal. Rose stood beside him, her hand finding his, her grip tight enough to hurt. Neither spoke. There were no words adequate to the moment, no language that could capture the particular agony of knowing that the system they lived under could, on a master's whim, destroy the fragile shelter of love they had built. That night, lying beside Rose in their cabin, Samuel felt something awaken in him that had been dormant since his mother's death. She had taught him about the spirits, the lower who had crossed the ocean with their people, who remembered the old ways, who could be called upon when human strength proved insufficient. His mother had warned him that such power came with a price, that the spirits demanded respect and sacrifice, that calling upon them was not to be done lightly. But as he held Rose and felt her silent tears against his chest, Samuel understood that some moments required more than human agency, more than prayer to a Christian God who seemed to favor only the masters. "I won't let them take you," he whispered into the darkness. "I swear it on my mother's grave, on every ancestor who suffered this evil. I will find a way." Rose turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight filtering through the cabin's cracks. "Samuel, what can we do? If we run, they'll hunt us with dogs. If we resist, they'll kill you and sell me anyway. This is the world we live in." "The world we live in," Samuel replied, his voice taking on an intensity Rose had never heard before, "is not the only world that exists. My mother taught me things, Rose, old things, powerful things. I never thought I would need them, but now—" He rose from their bed and moved to the small chest where he kept his few possessions. From beneath a false bottom he had carved, he removed a small cloth bundle, its fabric stained and worn. Inside were objects his mother had given him before she died: a stone from the Guinea coast carried across the ocean, a handful of earth from the grave of an ancestor, herbs dried so long they were nearly dust, and a small carved figure representing Baron Samedi, the lower of death and resurrection. "Tomorrow is Saturday," Samuel said. "Sunday we have a few hours after morning chores. There's a place in the woods, near the creek where it bends east. My mother took me there once, said it was a place where the veil between worlds grew thin. I'm going to call on powers that were old before these white men ever thought to enslave us. I'm going to ask for help, and I'm going to offer whatever price is demanded." Rose watched him with a mixture of fear and hope. She had heard stories too, whispered tales of conjure and rootwork, of enslaved people who had called upon African spirits to strike down cruel masters or to walk invisible past patrols. Such stories were always told in hushed voices, half disbelieved even by those who told them, yet clinging to life because sometimes hope required believing in powers beyond the visible world. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Samuel worked in the fields under the overseer's watchful eye, his body performing the familiar motions, while his mind ranged ahead to what he planned to attempt. He had never conducted a ceremony himself. His mother had always led such rituals during his childhood, and after her death, he had put those practices aside, unsure of his own ability to bridge the worlds. But desperation and love combined to create a kind of courage that transcended doubt. Sunday morning brought the usual routine, a few hours of enforced church attendance, where a white preacher lectured the enslaved congregation about obedience to masters as obedience to God, twisting scripture to justify chains. Samuel barely heard the words, his thoughts already in the woods, already composing the prayers and invocations his mother had taught him. Beside him, Rose sat rigid, her face a mask of composure that concealed the terror and fragile hope warring within her. As soon as they were released from church, Samuel gathered what he needed. He filled a small jug with water from the well, took cornmeal from the quarter's meager stores, and retrieved the bundle from his cabin. Rose wanted to accompany him, but he insisted she stay behind. "If this works," he told her, "there may be consequences. Better that you can truthfully say you knew nothing of what I did." The woods at the edge of the plantation were thick with pine and oak, the undergrowth dense with palmetto and vine. Samuel made his way carefully to the creek bend his mother had shown him years ago, a place where the water ran over smooth stones, and the trees grew in a peculiar circular pattern, as if avoiding some invisible boundary. The air here felt different, heavier somehow, charged with a presence that made the hair on his arms stand up. He cleared a space on the ground, creating a small altar from stones gathered from the creek bed. Upon this, he placed his offerings. The cornmeal formed into a cross, the water poured into a hollowed stone, the earth from his ancestors' grave sprinkled in a circle. He lit a small fire, feeding it carefully with dry wood until the flames burned steady and clean. Then, holding the carved figure of Baron Samedi, he began to speak in a mixture of English and the fragments of African languages his mother had preserved, words that carried the weight of centuries and the power of unbroken lineage. "Spirits of my ancestors, hear me," Samuel began, his voice low but firm. "You who survived the crossing, you who endured the lash and the chain, you who died in bondage but remained unbroken in spirit, I call upon you now. Baron Samedi, Lord of the crossroads between life and death, Master of justice denied, I invoke your presence. I offer my devotion, my respect, and my willingness to pay whatever price you demand." The forest around him seemed to grow quieter, the usual sounds of birds and insects fading to an uncanny silence. Samuel felt the temperature drop despite the summer heat, saw the flames of his small fire burn in colors that fire should not possess, deep purples and greens flickering among the orange and red. "I am Samuel, son of Adoma, who came from Guinea, grandson of Kwame, who died in the cane fields of Louisiana, heir to a line that stretches back to the old kingdoms before the ships came," Samuel continued, his voice growing stronger as the ritual deepened. "My wife Rose is to be sold away from me, torn from my arms by a man who calls himself master, but is nothing more than a thief of souls. I ask for justice, Baron. I ask for the scales to be balanced. I ask that Nathaniel Hartwell pay for his crimes against humanity, and that Rose and I be granted the freedom that was stolen from us." The fire flared suddenly, shooting sparks into the still air. Samuel felt a presence coalesce in the space before him, not quite visible but undeniably real, a weight in the atmosphere, a sense of ancient power focusing its attention upon him. When the voice came, it seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, resonant with an authority that made Samuel's bones ache. "You call upon powers you barely understand, child of Adoma," the voice said, neither male nor female, carrying accents of a dozen African languages beneath its words. "You ask for justice in a land built upon injustice, for balance in a system designed to be perpetually tilted. Do you comprehend what you invoke? Do you understand the price of true justice?" Samuel bowed his head, terror and determination warring within him. "I understand that my mother taught me these ways for a reason. I understand that sometimes human action alone is insufficient. I understand that I would rather die attempting to save Rose than live knowing I did nothing while they took her from me. Whatever price you demand, I will pay it." Silence followed, pregnant with assessment. Samuel could feel himself being evaluated, his spirit weighed against some cosmic measure he could not comprehend. Finally, the presence spoke again, and though the words were not comforting, they carried the finality of a covenant being formed. "Very well, Samuel, son of Adoma. Your love is genuine, your desperation real, your willingness to sacrifice authentic. I will grant your request, but know this. Justice, true justice, often looks like vengeance to those who benefit from injustice. Nathaniel Hartwell will pay for his crimes, but the payment will be extracted through you. You will be the instrument of his downfall, and you will carry the weight of what you do. The freedom you seek will come, but it will be born from actions that will mark you for the rest of your days. Do you accept these terms?" "I accept," Samuel said without hesitation, though he did not fully understand what he was agreeing to. "Use me however you must. I accept." The presence seemed to flow into him then, a sensation like ice water flooding his veins, bringing with it knowledge and power that had not been his moments before. He saw visions, not of the future exactly, but of possibilities, of pathways that might be taken, of opportunities that would present themselves. He understood that he was not being given supernatural strength or magical abilities in the simple sense. Instead, he was being granted clarity, timing, and the kind of terrible resolve necessary to do what would need to be done. When Samuel opened his eyes, the fire had burned down to embers, and the sun had shifted significantly in the sky. He had no sense of how much time had passed, minutes or hours he could not say, but he felt fundamentally changed, as if something essential in his spirit had been reconfigured. He gathered his ritual objects carefully, scattering the cornmeal for the spirits, pouring the remaining water as libation, covering all traces of his ceremony. Walking back to the quarters, Samuel moved with a new purposefulness. The world looked different to him now, sharper, clearer, with patterns and connections he had not perceived before. He saw the weaknesses in the plantation's routines, the predictable habits of the overseer, the places where surveillance grew lax. He understood with sudden clarity that Hartwell's cruelty was matched only by his arrogance, and arrogance created vulnerabilities. Rose was waiting at their cabin, her face tight with anxiety. The moment she saw Samuel's expression, she knew something had changed. "What happened?" she asked quietly, drawing him inside and closing the door. Samuel told her everything, the ritual, the presence, the bargain he had made. Rose listened in silence, her hand gripping his tightly. When he finished, she spoke with the same fierce determination he felt burning in his own chest. "Whatever comes, we face it together," she said. "I would rather die free than live as property one more day. Tell me what needs to be done." Over the following days, Samuel observed and waited with the patience of a hunter. The slave trader Hartwell had contacted was due to arrive the following Saturday, planning to inspect Rose and complete the purchase. This gave Samuel 1 week, 7 days to implement the plan taking shape in his mind, guided by the knowledge the spirits had granted him. Hartwell kept his money in a safe in his study, a fact everyone on the plantation knew. What they did not know was the combination, changed monthly and known only to Hartwell himself. But Samuel, with his newly sharpened perception, noticed something the master had not realized: Hartwell's habit of practicing the new combination each month by opening and closing the safe repeatedly while alone in his study, visible through the window to anyone watching from the right angle in the garden. Samuel began working in that garden during the early evening hours, volunteering for tasks that brought him near the house, keeping his head down and appearing focused on weeding and pruning while actually watching the study window. On Wednesday evening, his patience was rewarded. He saw Hartwell at the safe, watched the master's fingers move across the dial, counted the rotations, memorized the pattern. The combination burned itself into Samuel's memory with preternatural clarity, a gift from the bargain he had made. But money alone would not be enough. They needed time, distance, and a distraction significant enough to delay pursuit. Samuel knew that when they ran, and they would have to run, every white man in Harrison County would be mobilized to hunt them. The dogs would be released, the patrols organized, the roads watched. They needed something that would shake Hartwell's control, something that would buy them precious hours. The answer came to Samuel on Thursday night, again with that strange clarity that felt both like his own thoughts and like knowledge being downloaded from an external source. Fire. Not a wild conflagration that would kill innocent people or destroy the quarters where the enslaved lived, but a calculated blaze that would consume Hartwell's cotton barn, the massive structure where 3 years of cotton harvest sat waiting for transport to market, representing virtually all of Hartwell's liquid wealth. The barn stood at the far eastern edge of the plantation, distant enough from the quarters and the main house that a fire there would not spread to residential structures. It was also, Samuel noted, poorly guarded. Hartwell's arrogance led him to believe that no enslaved person would dare sabotage their master's property, knowing the horrific punishment that would follow if they were caught. The barn had a single lock, but Samuel had learned metalworking from his father before being sold away from Louisiana. The lock was old, simple. He could pick it with tools he could fashion from materials in the blacksmith shop where he sometimes worked. Friday night, Samuel lay awake beside Rose, going over the plan again and again. Tomorrow, Saturday, the slave trader would arrive in the afternoon. That morning before dawn, Samuel would pick the lock on the cotton barn and arrange combustible materials, dry straw, oil from the lamp stores, cotton itself, in multiple locations throughout the structure. He would not light it immediately. Instead, he would wait until Saturday evening, after the trader had arrived and begun his negotiations with Hartwell. The fire would serve multiple purposes. It would destroy Hartwell's wealth, create chaos that would delay any organized pursuit, and in the confusion, Samuel and Rose would take the money from the safe and disappear into the pine forests that stretched for hundreds of miles north toward the Indian Territory. "Are you afraid?" Rose whispered in the darkness. "Terrified," Samuel admitted, "but more afraid of losing you than of anything that might happen to me. Tomorrow night, one way or another, we will no longer be Hartwell's property. We will be free or we will be dead, but we will not be slaves." Rose was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised him. "I saw my grandmother in a dream last night. She died before I was born, but my mother described her to me so many times I know her face." She was smiling, Samuel. She said, "The spirits walk with you, child. Trust the old ways. I think what you did in the woods, I think it was right. I think our ancestors are helping us." Saturday dawned clear and hot. the sun rising blood-red over the pine forests. Samuel moved through his morning chores in a state of heightened awareness, every sense sharp, every moment charged with significance. He worked in the blacksmith shop, ostensibly repairing tools, actually fashioning the lockpicks he would need. The blacksmith, an older enslaved man named Marcus, watched him work with knowing eyes, but said nothing. There was an understanding among the enslaved. You did not ask questions about things you did not want to be forced to answer. At mid-morning, a cloud of dust on the road announced the arrival of the slave trader. Samuel watched from a distance as the man rode up to the main house, a heavy-set white man in his 40s, mounted on a fine horse, with 2 assistants following behind, leading a wagon. This was Thomas Greer, known throughout East Texas as one of the most active buyers in the domestic slave trade, a man who thought nothing of separating families, who evaluated human beings with the same dispassion he might show when purchasing livestock. Hartwell emerged from the house to greet Greer warmly, the 2 men shaking hands like old friends engaged in ordinary business. Samuel felt bile rise in his throat watching them, knowing they were discussing Rose as if she were merchandise, debating her value, perhaps haggling over price. The spirits present stirred within him, reminding him of the bargain, steadying his resolve. The examination happened after lunch. Rose was brought from the fields, made to stand in the yard while Greer inspected her as he would a horse, checking her teeth, her hands, asking crude questions about her health and history. Samuel was working within sight, but forced himself not to react, knowing that any display of emotion would only make things worse. Rose stood through it with quiet dignity, her face expressionless, though Samuel knew the humiliation was cutting her deeply. Greer seemed satisfied. Samuel could not hear the conversation from where he stood, but he saw money change hands, a down payment, he assumed, with the rest to be paid upon delivery. The trader planned to stay overnight at the plantation, departing Sunday morning with Rose in chains. This was exactly what Samuel had anticipated. Tonight, while Greer and Hartwell celebrated their transaction over dinner and drinks, Samuel would set his plan in motion. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Samuel returned to the quarters early, claiming illness, a headache from the heat. The overseer, drunk and lazy on a Saturday afternoon, waved him away without care. In the cabin, Samuel prepared the items he would need, the lockpicks concealed in his clothing, a small bag for the money he would steal, flint and steel for starting the fire, and the ritual objects from his mother, which he would carry as protection. Rose arrived as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, released from her work early, since she was to be sold away the next morning. Hartwell, in a display of false magnanimity, had even sent food from the main house, as if feeding them well one last time somehow absolved him of the crime he was committing. They ate in silence, neither having appetite, but needing strength for what lay ahead. As darkness fell, they heard sounds of revelry from the main house, Greer and Hartwell drinking, celebrating their successful transaction. The other enslaved people in the quarters moved about their evening routines, unaware that this night would be different from all others. Samuel waited until the sounds from the main house grew louder and less coherent, indicating that the white men were well into their cups. "It's time," Samuel whispered to Rose as the moon rose over the pine trees, casting silver light across the quarters. They had changed into their darkest clothes, the better to move unseen through the shadows. Samuel carried his small bag of tools and ritual objects, while Rose had packed what little they owned that might prove useful: a knife, a water skin, dried food stolen in small amounts over the past days. They moved silently from their cabin, keeping to the shadows between buildings. The quarters were quiet now, most people already asleep after another brutal week of labor. Only old Jacob sat outside his cabin, smoking a pipe, his eyes following Samuel and Rose as they passed. He raised one hand in a gesture that might have been farewell or blessing, then deliberately turned his gaze away. Whatever he suspected they were doing, he had chosen not to see it. The cotton barn loomed against the night sky, a massive structure that represented years of enslaved labor condensed into bales of white fiber. Samuel approached it carefully, checking for any guards or watchers. As he had observed, Hartwell's arrogance left the barn unprotected. Why guard against theft when the enslaved people who might steal were themselves property, with nowhere to sell cotton even if they took it? The lock yielded to Samuel's picks within minutes, his hands moving with a sureness that came from both skill and the strange certainty the spirits had granted him. Inside, the barn was packed with cotton bales stacked to the rafters, the air thick with cotton dust, and the sweet musty smell of stored fiber. In the dim moonlight filtering through gaps in the walls, Samuel could see the fortune Hartwell had accumulated, hundreds of bales, each representing countless hours of brutal labor in the killing heat. Working quickly, Samuel arranged his accelerants. He scattered loose cotton and straw throughout the barn, creating pathways that would allow fire to spread rapidly. He poured lamp oil, stolen from the supply shed days earlier, across strategic bales. He positioned everything to ensure the fire would consume the entire structure, but would burn outward, away from the quarters where enslaved people slept. Even in vengeance, Samuel would not allow innocent people to be harmed. Rose stood watch at the door, her body tense, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign they had been discovered. "How much longer?" she whispered. "Almost done," Samuel replied, positioning the last of his combustible materials. "Once I light this, we'll have perhaps 5 minutes before someone notices the smoke. We need to be at the main house by then, in and out of that study before the alarm is raised." He struck his flint against steel, sending sparks into the oil-soaked straw. The fire caught immediately, small flames that quickly grew larger, beginning to consume the cotton with hungry eagerness. Samuel and Rose backed out of the barn, and Samuel carefully replaced the lock, making it appear as if the barn had not been entered. Let Hartwell think it was spontaneous combustion, or a lightning strike, or divine judgment. Anything but deliberate sabotage, at least until they were long gone. They ran toward the main house, keeping low, using the landscape's shadows. Behind them, the fire in the barn was growing, orange light beginning to flicker through the gaps in the walls. They had perhaps 3 minutes before someone noticed. The main house stood dark except for the study and dining room, where Hartwell and Greer continued their drinking and negotiating. Samuel could hear their voices through the open windows, Greer describing other slaves he had recently purchased, Hartwell boasting about the productivity of his plantation. The casual cruelty in their conversation, the way they discussed human beings as mere commodities, strengthened Samuel's resolve. He led Rose around to the back of the house, to a window he had left slightly ajar earlier that day while working in the garden. The window opened into a storage room adjacent to Hartwell's study. They slipped inside silently, finding themselves in a space cluttered with old furniture and supplies. Through the connecting door, they could hear Hartwell and Greer more clearly now, their voices slurred with alcohol. Samuel moved to the door between the storage room and the study, opening it just enough to see inside. The room was empty. Both men were in the dining room across the hall. The safe stood against the far wall exactly where Samuel had observed it. He motioned for Rose to stay back, then crept into the study, his heart hammering so loudly he was certain the white men would hear it. His fingers found the safe's dial, and the combination he had memorized flowed from his hands as if guided by muscle memory. Left 3 times to 23, right twice to 47, left once to 15, right to 8. The mechanism clicked and the door swung open. Inside were stacks of bills, Hartwell's operating cash, the money he used for purchasing supplies, paying overseers, buying more human beings. Samuel's hands trembled as he transferred the money into his bag. He was crossing a threshold here, committing an act that would make him a fugitive, a criminal in the eyes of the law. But what law? A law that said Rose was property? A law that said their love was meaningless because a white man's profit mattered more? Samuel rejected that law, rejected the entire rotten system it upheld. He was closing the safe when the first shout came from outside. "Fire! The cotton barn's ablaze!" Chaos erupted immediately. Hartwell and Greer rushed from the dining room, running toward the front of the house. Samuel heard the front door slam open, heard Hartwell screaming for his overseer, for slaves to form a bucket brigade, for someone to save his cotton. The panic in the master's voice brought Samuel a grim satisfaction. Let Hartwell feel powerless for once. Let him watch his wealth burn as he had burned away so many lives. Samuel and Rose slipped back through the storage room and out the window as the plantation exploded into frantic activity. Enslaved people were being roused from their quarters, forced from sleep to fight a fire that threatened their master's fortune. In the confusion and darkness, no one noticed 2 figures moving away from the main house, heading not toward the fire but toward the forest. They ran through the gardens, past the outbuildings, toward the tree line. Behind them, the cotton barn was fully engulfed now, flames shooting into the night sky, illuminating the plantation in hellish orange light. Samuel could hear Hartwell's voice raised in fury and desperation, could see silhouettes of people running with buckets of water that would prove useless against an inferno of this magnitude. As Samuel and Rose reached the forest's edge, Samuel paused for one last look back. The plantation that had been his prison for years was silhouetted against the burning barn, the fire consuming 3 years of cotton harvest, destroying the wealth built on stolen labor. He felt the spirit's presence within him, felt their satisfaction at this small balancing of cosmic scales. Hartwell would be financially ruined, would likely lose the plantation, would fall from his position of power and privilege. It was not full justice. Nothing could restore the years stolen, the lives destroyed, but it was something. If you're still with us witnessing Samuel and Rose's desperate bid for freedom, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're committed to bringing you these powerful stories of resistance that history tried to forget. Drop a comment and let us know what you think of Samuel's actions. Was this justice or vengeance? Where are you watching from? Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. Rose tugged at his arm. We need to go, now, before they realize we're missing. Samuel nodded, and together they plunged into the forest. The pine trees closed around them, offering concealment and the first taste of something that might, with luck and the spirit's continued favor, become freedom. They moved north by the stars, using the knowledge Samuel had gathered over years of hunting in these woods during the rare times enslaved people were permitted to supplement their meager rations. The forest at night was alive with sounds: owls hunting, small animals rustling through undergrowth, the wind sighing through pine needles. Samuel and Rose moved as quickly as they dared, trying to put distance between themselves and the plantation, while the chaos of the fire occupied everyone's attention. They knew that by morning, when Greer discovered Rose missing and Hartwell discovered his safe emptied, the hunt would begin in earnest. They traveled through the night without stopping, driven by fear and desperate hope. The money Samuel had stolen, nearly $800, was more than most enslaved people ever saw in their entire lives. It could buy them passage north, could sustain them while they established new identities in a free state. But first they had to survive the immediate pursuit, had to reach territory where Hartwell's influence did not extend. As dawn approached, they finally stopped to rest in a dense thicket near a creek. They were perhaps 10 miles from the plantation, not nearly far enough, but they could not run indefinitely without rest. They drank from the creek, ate some of the dried food Rose had brought, and allowed themselves a few hours of fitful sleep, taking turns keeping watch. Samuel woke to Rose shaking his shoulder urgently. The sun was high. They had slept longer than intended. "Listen," Rose whispered. In the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the baying of hounds. The hunt had begun. They ran again, following the creek to mask their scent, moving as quickly as exhaustion would allow. The sound of the dogs grew louder, closer. Hartwell had wasted no time organizing the pursuit. Of course he hadn't. A runaway slave who had stolen money and possibly caused the fire that destroyed his cotton. Hartwell would hunt them to the ends of the earth. The creek led them north and east, deeper into the pine barrens. This was good. The dense forest and numerous waterways would make tracking difficult, but the dogs were trained and persistent, and Samuel knew that eventually they would need to find a way to throw off the pursuit entirely. As they ran, Samuel found himself praying, calling upon the spirits who had answered his initial invocation. "Baron Samedi, you who granted me this chance, do not abandon us now. Guide us to safety, confuse our pursuers. Grant us the freedom you promised." Whether through spiritual intervention or simple fortune, they stumbled upon salvation in the form of a small settlement of free black people, a rare thing in East Texas, but not unheard of. These were people who had purchased their freedom years earlier, or whose owners had freed them in wills, and who had established a small community in the wilderness, farming and hunting, trying to carve out lives beyond slavery's reach. An older woman saw them emerge from the forest, clearly exhausted and frightened, and immediately understood their situation. Without a word, she ushered them into a cabin and hid them beneath a false floor, a hiding place constructed for exactly this purpose. The free black community lived with the constant threat of being kidnapped back into slavery. False floors, hidden rooms, and quick escape routes were necessities of survival. The dogs arrived within the hour, their baying filling the air with menace as the hunting party crashed through the settlement. Samuel and Rose lay perfectly still beneath the floorboards, barely breathing, listening to boots stomping overhead. They heard Hartwell's voice, venomous with rage, demanding to know if anyone had seen 2 runaway slaves, a man and a woman, dangerous criminals who had stolen property and burned down a barn. The woman who had hidden them, whose name was Miriam, faced down Hartwell with remarkable composure. "We've seen no runaways, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the guns pointed at her. "We're law-abiding free people here registered with the county. We want no trouble." Hartwell clearly did not believe her, but the legal status of free black people, tenuous as it was, provided some small protection. He could not simply tear apart their homes without cause, not without risking legal complications he could ill afford, given his suddenly precarious financial situation. The dogs sniffed around the settlement, confused by the many scents of people who lived there, unable to distinguish the fugitive's trail from all the others. After what felt like hours, but was perhaps only 30 minutes, Hartwell and his men departed, continuing north with the dogs. Samuel and Rose remained hidden until nightfall, when Miriam finally opened the false floor and helped them out. They were stiff and cramped from hours of immobility, but alive and still free. "You can't stay here," Miriam told them bluntly as she fed them cornbread and beans. "Hartwell will come back, maybe with the sheriff, maybe with night riders who won't care about our free papers. You need to keep moving, and you need to be smarter about it." Her husband, Isaac, a grizzled man in his 60s who had bought his freedom 30 years earlier, spread a crude map on the table. "The Indian Territory is your best hope," he said, tracing a route with his finger. "About 80 miles northeast, the Cherokee Nation, they've taken in runaway slaves before, and U.S. law doesn't reach there the same way. It won't be easy. You'll need to cross the Sabine River, travel through rough country, avoid patrols and slave catchers. But if you make it, you might have a chance." Isaac provided them with better supplies, a real map, dried venison, blankets, and a pistol with 6 rounds. "Can you shoot?" he asked Samuel. "Well enough," Samuel replied, though in truth he had little experience with firearms. Enslaved people were forbidden from owning weapons, though he had occasionally hunted with his master's old rifle under supervision. "The Indian Territory," Rose said softly, testing the words. "I've heard people speak of it, but always as a distant dream, something impossible to reach." "Nothing's impossible," Miriam said, her weathered hand covering Rose's. "My mother was born in Africa, stolen and brought here in chains. She never saw freedom, but she told me stories of our homeland, made me promise to never accept slavery as natural or right. You two are doing what she dreamed of, fighting for your freedom. The spirits of all our ancestors walk with you." They left the settlement under cover of darkness, following the route Isaac had mapped. The journey to the Indian Territory would take them through some of the most dangerous country in East Texas, dense forests where outlaws hid, swamps where people disappeared, and countless opportunities to encounter slave patrols or bounty hunters. But it also offered something Samuel and Rose had never truly possessed: hope. For 3 days they traveled, moving mostly at night, hiding during daylight hours. They followed game trails and creek beds, avoided roads and settlements, lived on the supplies Isaac had provided, supplemented by whatever they could forage. Samuel felt the spirit's presence constantly now, a subtle guidance that helped them choose the right path at crossroads, warned them when danger was near, granted them the endurance to keep moving when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. On the 4th day, they encountered their first real obstacle, a river swollen with recent rains running fast and deep. This was one of the tributaries that fed into the Sabine, and they would need to cross it to continue northeast. Rose stared at the churning water with obvious fear. "I can't swim," she admitted. "Never had the chance to learn." Samuel studied the river, looking for a shallow crossing point or fallen tree that might serve as a bridge. The spirit's presence within him intensified, and he found his gaze drawn to a spot about 100 yards upstream, where the river bent around a rocky outcropping. Something about that location called to him. They made their way upstream, and as they approached the outcropping, Samuel saw what the spirits had been showing him. A massive cypress tree had fallen across the river during some past storm, creating a natural bridge. The trunk was thick enough to walk across if they were careful, though the rushing water below made the prospect terrifying. "I'll go first," Samuel said. "Make sure it's stable, then I'll come back and help you across." He stepped onto the fallen tree, arms outstretched for balance, moving slowly and deliberately. The bark was slick with moss. The trunk shifted slightly under his weight, and the roar of the water below tried to pull his attention downward, but he made it across, then returned for Rose. "Hold on to me," he told her. "Don't look down. Just focus on the opposite bank. I won't let you fall." Rose gripped his arm tightly, and together they inched across the fallen tree. Halfway over, Rose's foot slipped on the wet bark, and for a heart-stopping moment she began to fall. Samuel caught her, pulling her against him, steadying them both. They stood frozen on the tree trunk, the water raging beneath them, both breathing hard. "I've got you," Samuel whispered. "We're almost there, just a little farther." They completed the crossing and collapsed on the far bank, both shaking with released tension. But they had made it. One more obstacle overcome, one step closer to the Indian Territory and the possibility of freedom. That night, they made camp in a dense stand of pine trees, allowing themselves a small fire for the first time since leaving the settlement. As they sat warming themselves, Rose spoke quietly. "Do you think we'll make it?" "Truly." Samuel was silent for a moment, considering. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know we're farther from Hartwell's plantation than I ever thought we'd get. I know that because of what we did. Hartwell is probably financially ruined. I know that the spirits have guided us this far and haven't abandoned us. And I know that even if we're caught tomorrow, we've had these days of freedom, these moments where we belong to ourselves and no one else. That's more than many enslaved people ever get." Rose moved closer to him, and they sat together watching the small fire. "Tell me what you think it will be like," she said. "If we make it to the Indian Territory, tell me about the life we might have." Samuel smiled, allowing himself to imagine for the first time. "We'll find a place to build a cabin, maybe near a creek for water. I'll hunt and fish. You'll grow a garden. Those herbs you're so good with, vegetables, maybe even flowers just for beauty. We'll have children who will be born free, who will never know what it means to be owned by another person. We'll grow old together, watching seasons change, living out our days in peace." "That sounds like heaven," Rose whispered. "It sounds like what should have been every person's birthright from the beginning," Samuel replied. "But we were born into a world that denied us that birthright, so now we fight to claim it." The next morning brought an unexpected encounter. They were moving through a relatively open stretch of forest when they heard voices ahead. Samuel motioned for Rose to hide while he crept forward to investigate. What he saw made his blood run cold. A group of 5 white men, heavily armed, studying the ground with the focused attention of hunters tracking prey, slave catchers. Samuel retreated silently to where Rose waited and whispered urgently, "Bounty hunters ahead, maybe 50 yards. They're studying tracks. Might be ours, might be someone else's. Either way, we need to circle around them without being seen or heard." They moved as quietly as possible through the underbrush, giving the hunters a wide berth. But luck, which had favored them thus far, suddenly turned. A twig snapped under Rose's foot, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the quiet forest. "There!" one of the hunters shouted. "In the trees!" Samuel and Rose ran. Behind them, they heard the hunters crashing through the forest in pursuit, heard shouted commands and the baying of a dog that must have been with the group. The chase was on, and this time there would be no friendly settlement to hide them, no convenient river crossing to slow the pursuers. They ran with the desperate speed of those who understand that capture means not just the loss of freedom, but likely death. Hartwell would not be merciful to slaves who had stolen from him and burned his cotton. The best they could hope for if caught would be sail to the brutal sugar plantations of Louisiana, where the average life expectancy of an enslaved worker was measured in years. The worst would be public execution as an example to other enslaved people who might dare to resist. Samuel felt the spirits surging within him, granting him clarity even in panic. He saw a ravine ahead, steep-sided and thick with vegetation. "This way!" he shouted to Rose, and they plunged over the edge, sliding and tumbling down the steep slope, grabbing at roots and bushes to control their descent. They landed hard at the bottom, bruised but unbroken, and immediately started moving along the ravine bed. Above, they heard the hunters reach the edge, heard them debating whether to follow or try to circle around. The ravine bought them precious minutes. It also led them by providence or spiritual guidance to a cave, a small opening in the ravine wall, partially concealed by hanging vines. Samuel pulled Rose inside, and they scrambled back into the darkness as far as they could go. The cave was shallow, barely deep enough to hide them, but it would have to do. They heard the hunters enter the ravine, heard them passing close to the cave entrance, so close that Samuel could have reached out and touched them. Rose's hand found his in the darkness, squeezing tightly. They held their breath, silent and still as death. One of the hunters paused directly in front of the cave entrance. "Thought I saw something," he muttered. Samuel's hand moved to the pistol Isaac had given him. If the man looked behind the vines, if they were discovered, he would shoot. He would not let them take Rose alive. But the hunter's companion called him forward. "They must have kept going down the ravine. Come on, we'll lose them if we don't hurry." The footsteps receded. Samuel and Rose remained frozen for another hour, making absolutely certain the hunters had moved on, before finally allowing themselves to breathe normally again. They had survived another close call, but Samuel knew their luck could not hold indefinitely. They emerged from the cave as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, moving with extreme caution in case the hunters had doubled back. The ravine led them northeast, the direction they needed to go, and they followed it for miles as darkness settled over the forest. Samuel's body ached from the day's exertions, and he could see exhaustion etched into every line of Rose's face, but they could not afford to stop yet. Not while hunters were in the area, not while they remained so close to capture. It was near midnight when they finally allowed themselves to rest, collapsing in a dense thicket of palmetto and pine. They ate the last of their dried venison, rationing their water, knowing their supplies were running dangerously low. According to Isaac's map, they were perhaps 30 miles from the Indian Territory now, 2 or 3 more days of hard travel, if they could maintain their pace and avoid further encounters. "Samuel," Rose said quietly as they prepared to sleep in shifts, "what you did with the spirits, calling on them, do you think there will be consequences? I mean beyond what we're already facing?" Samuel had been thinking about this question since the night of the ritual. The presence he had felt, the bargain he had made, such things did not come without cost. "I don't know," he admitted. "My mother warned me that the spirits grant power but demand payment. I offered to pay whatever price was asked. I suppose I'll discover what that means in time. Do you regret it?" Samuel looked at her, at this woman he loved enough to risk everything for, and shook his head. "No, even if the price is my life. I don't regret it. You're free, Rose. Whatever happens now, you've tasted freedom. That's worth any cost." Rose leaned against him, and they sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Finally, she spoke again. "When we reach the Indian Territory, when we're truly safe, I want to learn the old ways, the things your mother taught you, the connection to our ancestors and the spirits. I don't want that knowledge to die with our generation. I'll teach you everything I know," Samuel promised, "and we'll teach our children if we're blessed with them. The spirits crossed the ocean with our people, survived slavery's attempts to erase our culture. We'll keep that tradition alive." The next morning brought heavy fog, a blessing that concealed them as they traveled, but also disoriented them, making navigation difficult. Samuel relied on his sense of direction and the subtle guidance he felt from the spirits to keep them moving northeast. The fog persisted through most of the day, finally burning off in late afternoon to reveal a landscape that was changing. Fewer pines now, more hardwood forests, signs that they were approaching different territory. They came upon a small creek and stopped to refill their water skins. As Samuel knelt by the water, he saw something that made his heart leap. A carved marker on a tree, the kind used by the Underground Railroad to guide fugitives north. They were on a freedom trail, a route used by others who had fled slavery. This meant they were likely approaching conductors or safe houses, people who might help them. Following the markers led them to a small homestead as evening approached. An older black man was chopping wood outside a modest cabin, and he stopped when he saw them emerge from the forest. His eyes took in their ragged appearance, their exhaustion, and understanding dawned immediately. "You're running," he said simply. It was not a question. "Yes," Samuel replied, "headed for the Indian Territory. We've come from Harrison County, been traveling for nearly a week." The man, who introduced himself as Josiah, brought them inside and fed them properly for the first time since leaving Miriam and Isaac's settlement. His wife, Ruth, tended to Rose's blistered feet, while Josiah spoke quietly with Samuel. "The Cherokee Nation will take you in," Josiah confirmed, "but you need to understand it's not perfect freedom. Some Cherokee own slaves themselves, though generally they treat them better than white owners do. Others will help fugitives, hide them, even intermarry with them. It's complicated, but it's better than what you're running from." He pulled out a more detailed map than Isaac had provided, showing Samuel the best route into Cherokee territory and the names of people who might help them once they arrived. "You're close now," Josiah said. "Maybe 20 miles to the border, but those last 20 miles might be the most dangerous. This area sees a lot of bounty hunters, and the Cherokee Nation patrols its borders. You'll need to approach carefully. Make sure you contact the right people." They stayed with Josiah and Ruth for 2 days, recovering their strength, letting their bodies heal from the brutal journey. Ruth washed their clothes, provided them with better supplies, even gave Rose a dress that fit properly, the first new clothing Rose had worn in years. Josiah gave Samuel detailed instructions on who to seek out once they crossed into Cherokee territory. "There's a man named Ridge Walker," Josiah told him. "He's Cherokee, married to a black woman who escaped slavery. He helps fugitives get established, finds them work, protects them from bounty hunters. If you can reach him, you'll be as safe as it's possible to be." On the morning they departed, Ruth embraced Rose tightly. "You're almost there, child," she whispered. "Almost free. Don't give up now." The final stretch of their journey took them through increasingly wild country, forests so dense that little sunlight penetrated the canopy, swamps where the ground itself seemed to shift underfoot, They saw signs of human presence. Old campsites, marked trails, occasionally distant smoke, but they avoided all contact, unwilling to risk exposure when they were so close to their goal. On what Samuel calculated was the 13th day since they fled Hartwell's plantation, they reached the Sabine River. This was the boundary, the line between United States territory and the Cherokee Nation. Beyond that water lay a different jurisdiction, a place where Hartwell's warrant and American slave law held less power. The river was wide here, perhaps 200 yards across, running swift and dark. They followed it north for several hours, looking for a crossing point, until they found what appeared to be a regular ford, a place where the water ran shallower, and the banks showed signs of frequent use by travelers. "This is it," Samuel said, feeling the spirit's presence confirming his assessment. "We cross here." They waded into the river as afternoon light slanted through the trees, the water rising to their waists, then their chests. The current pulled at them, trying to sweep them downstream, but they fought forward, step by difficult step. Samuel held Rose's hand tightly, refusing to let the water separate them, not when freedom waited on the opposite bank. They were halfway across when Samuel heard a shout from behind them. He turned to see riders on the Texas side of the river, 3 men on horseback, and even at this distance, Samuel recognized the lead rider's posture and bearing. Hartwell had caught up to them at last. "Stop!" Hartwell screamed across the water. "You're still in United States territory. Stop or I'll shoot." Samuel and Rose pushed forward desperately, the opposite bank tantalizingly close now. Behind them they heard the splash of horses entering the water. Hartwell was pursuing them even into the river. A gunshot cracked across the water. The bullet hit somewhere to Samuel's left, sending up a small fountain of spray. Rose stumbled, and for a terrifying moment Samuel thought she had been hit, but she recovered, pure fear driving her forward. They reached the shallows on the Cherokee side and scrambled up the bank, dripping and gasping. Samuel turned to see Hartwell in mid-river, his horse struggling against the current, his face twisted with rage. But he had stopped advancing. The boundary line was real, and even in his fury, Hartwell understood that crossing into Cherokee Nation territory to pursue fugitive slaves was a different matter than hunting them in Texas. "I'll find you," Hartwell screamed across the water. "I'll offer a reward so high that every bounty hunter in the territory will be looking for you. You'll never be safe, never be free." Samuel felt the spirit surge within him one final time, felt words rising to his lips that came from somewhere deeper than his conscious mind. When he spoke, his voice carried across the water with unnatural clarity, resonating with power that made even Hartwell's horse rear back in fear. "You have no power over us anymore, Nathaniel Hartwell. Your wealth is ashes. Your authority ended. The spirits of all those you enslaved and murdered curse you. You will die broken and alone, unmourned and unforgiven. This is the price of your cruelty, the harvest of seeds you planted. We are free, and you are nothing." The words seemed to physically strike Hartwell. His face went pale, and Samuel saw fear replace rage in his eyes. The master who had seemed so powerful, so invincible, suddenly appeared small and impotent, sitting on his horse in the middle of a river, screaming threats that could no longer reach their targets. Samuel turned his back on Hartwell and walked away, Rose beside him into the Cherokee Nation and toward whatever future they might build. Behind them, Hartwell's curses faded into the sound of water and wind. They walked for another hour before encountering their first Cherokee patrol, 3 men on horseback, who studied them with cautious interest. Samuel explained their situation, mentioned Ridge Walker's name as Josiah had instructed, and saw recognition in the lead rider's eyes. "Ridge Walker's settlement is a day's walk north," the man said in English tinged with a Cherokee accent. "I'll take you there. You'll be safe. We don't return fugitives to American slave catchers." That evening, as they approached Ridge Walker's settlement, a small community of Cherokee families and escaped slaves living together, Samuel and Rose saw smoke rising from cooking fires, heard children playing, witnessed people moving about their lives without chains or overseers, or the constant threat of separation. It was not perfect. Samuel could already see the complexities Josiah had warned about, the compromises and challenges of this new life. But it was freedom, or as close to freedom as they could reach, in a world still dominated by slavery. Ridge Walker himself came out to meet them, a tall Cherokee man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "You're safe here," he said simply. "Rest now. Tomorrow we'll talk about building you a life." That night, lying beside Rose in a real bed in a small cabin Ridge Walker had provided, Samuel finally allowed himself to believe they had made it. The journey that had begun with a desperate ritual in the woods had carried them across 100 miles of hostile territory, through pursuit and danger and moments when death seemed certain. But the spirits had kept their bargain, had guided them to this place where they could begin again. "Thank you," Samuel whispered into the darkness, uncertain whether he was addressing Rose, the spirits, his ancestors, or all of them together. "Thank you." Rose's hand found his. "We did it," she said, wonder in her voice. "We're actually free." "We are," Samuel confirmed, "and tomorrow we start building the life we dreamed of." Outside, the Cherokee Nation stretched away into darkness, a land that was neither perfect nor paradise, but offered something Samuel and Rose had never truly possessed, the chance to determine their own destiny, to live as human beings rather than property, to build a future on their own terms. The fire that had consumed Hartwell's cotton barn had also burned away their chains. The money stolen from his safe had funded their escape. The spirits invoked in desperation had guided them to safety. Justice, imperfect and incomplete but real nonetheless, had been served. And Samuel and Rose, who had been enslaved, who had been treated as less than human, who had been marked for separation and sale, now stood on free soil, ready to write the next chapter of their story with their own hands. If you've stayed with us through Samuel and Rose's incredible journey to freedom, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more untold stories of resistance and survival. Let us know in the comments, what did you think of this story? Where are you watching from? These stories of courage and determination deserve to be remembered and shared. Thank you for being part of keeping these voices alive.